How often do we need to check our tefillin? So it turns out there is a midrash, Mechila, to this week's parsha, which brings a dispute about it. And I'm going to get into this in a moment, but first, a few words about checking tefillin and Mezuza. We know that the tefillin has 4 parshiot, 4 different passages of the Torah that are put into it, because in this week's parsha, in the end, we find that the Torah says that you should have these as ot, as a sign on your arm, and as a remembrance, or totafot, might be an ornament of some sort, between your eyes. So that's the 2 parts of tefillin. The one that's on the arm, across from the heart, as it says, these words should be on your heart, and the one on the head, above the eyes, in the middle of the head. So that's the 2 tefillins. But as the Midrash and the Talmud tells us, the 4 parshiot that go into the tefillin shel are all on one parchment, because it says one sign, as opposed to the 4 parshiot in the tefillin of the head are 4 different compartments. Each parsha is in its own compartment. In a sense, as the Kabbalists, the Mekubalim say, the senses that we have are divided into the senses that we have in our head are being able to see, hear, smell, and taste. So that's kineged the 4 parshiot in the head. And the senses that we have on the body, there's also 4, but they're all related. They're all considered touch, the sense of touching. And that's the 4 that are all on one parsha, on one parchment. So that's the kineged, the 4 that are on one parchment, is the tefillin shel. So we're supposed to subdue all our senses to serve Hashem. By the way, at the end of Shabbat, the reason Havdalah has all these different things, smelling, seeing the fire, making the bracha, and tasting the wine, that's also the 4 senses. It's kineged the 4 senses that are in the head. We want to distinguish between what's weekly, secular, and what's holy on Shabbat. All the 4 senses are kind of renewed, completely different on Shabbat than on a weekday. So coming back to the tefillin, the 2 parshiot that the Torah says to put on as a sign on our arm and above the eyes is mentioned in this week's parsha. And 2 others are, of course, in parshiot Vayetchanan and Ekev, in the book of Dvarim. So in those other parshiot, it says that you should write them on your doorposts, right, as a sign on the doorpost, and that's a Mezuza. The biblical word Mezuza means the actual doorpost, but we today call the actual parchment that's on the doorpost, we call the Mezuza. So the parshiot of this, in Parshat Bo, in this week's parsha, the 2 passages do not say anything about the signs on the houses. Maybe because the Jews were still in desert and there were no houses, they lived in tents. And maybe that's why the Torah only tells us about the other 2 parshiot to write it as a signs. That's when Moshe is telling his last words before dying, in the last month or so, when he was giving his lectures in the book of Dvarim. That's when he mentioned the Mezuza as well. But in this week's parsha, we only learn about the tefillin, and 2 of the parshiot of the tefillin are mentioned here. So the question is, how often do you have to check it? About the Mezuza, the law is very clear. The Talmud tells us that you have to check the Mezuza twice in 7 years. But how often do you have to check tefillin? So the Mechila is a halachic midrash to this week's parsha, Parshat Bo. It says that there is a dispute of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel about it. Now, obviously, everybody knows that when Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel argue, we usually follow Beit Hillel. But here it's very interesting. According to our Mechila, it says that Beit Hillel say you have to check tefillin every year, once a year. Why would you have to check tefillin once a year? Because it says you should keep this chukah, this chok, this statue, miyamim yamima. And this expression, miyamim yamima, sounds like every year. Now, a lot of the Mifarshim, a lot of the commentators and some of the sages of the Talmud thought that it's talking about the Chukah of Pesach. It's talking about the Paschal offering. You have to keep it once a year. So this is very clear. But some said it's talking about Tefillin. So what does it mean, Yamim Yamima, then about Tefillin? Obviously, it doesn't mean you have to put on Tefillin once a year. So it means you have to check Tefillin once a year. That's the opinion of Beit Hillel. And Beit Shammai say you don't have to check it at all. As long as it looks good on the outside, you don't have to check Tefillin. Mistama, if it's good outside, it's good inside. And it says that Shammai tells about the Tefillin of his grandfather that he's still wearing, presumably that he never had to check, meaning that Tefillin doesn't have to be checked. You could just keep wearing it and never check it. Very interesting. So the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, brings a similar dispute, but with different names. There it's a dispute of Rebbe and Rashbag, whether you have to check Tefillin every year or you don't have to check it at all. Rashbag is Rabbi Shimon bar Gamliel. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is the father of Rebbe. Rebbe, of course, is the author of the Mishnah. So there, it's a dispute of two sages at the end of Mishnaic period. And there, it's not Shammai, but Hillel, who says, this is the Tefillin of my grandfather. And therefore, it makes sense now that the halacha is like the Maserav of Hillel. And in fact, Rambam and Shulchan Aruch, all Paskin, all rule in accordance with this, that you do not have to check Tefillin. But there is one condition involved here. That's only true about Tefillin that's being put on constantly. Meaning if it's good outside, it's good inside. There's no reason to assume something went wrong inside and the letters disappeared or the parchments became ripped or anything else went bad over time, because then the outside boxes would also go bad, most likely. But if you just keep the boxes of Tefillin hidden somewhere, stored somewhere for a while, and then you decide to start putting on Tefillin, you have to check it. That's how Shulchan Aruch rules. And of course, there are some righteous people who check Tefillin once in a while, because even though you don't have to, according to the letter of the law, it might be a good idea. And in addition, if Tefillin was in fact in a condition that might destroy it, for instance, it fell into the water, or it was left under direct sunlight. Sometimes people leave the Tefillin in the car, in the back, where there is direct sunlight from through the car window, and sometimes it gets extremely hot inside. Chas v'shalom, I mean, it could lead to all kinds of problems. There were people, for instance, who left a child in the car, a little child, a baby, and brought it to a life-threatening situation, because when it's a really hot day in a closed car, the heat and the stuffiness can cause even death, chas v'shalom. But one of the things you shouldn't do is leave the Tefillin like that, in the place where direct sunlight can come to it and may actually destroy the Tefillin. Sometimes the Parshat inside can actually melt, the ink can actually melt. So if you don't do anything that can cause the Tefillin to go bad, then in theory you do not have to check it, as long as it looks good outside. And by the way, I saw in the Sefer Pitchei Teshuvot that Piskei Teshuvot, that even Mezuza, even though, like I mentioned, the Talmud tells us you have to check it twice in 7 years, if it's really well sealed, it's a really good container, and inside, especially in the rooms inside the house, then there's an opinion you do not have to check it. It's still a good idea once in a while to check the mezuzah. Who knows what happened? Especially people who don't know even if originally when they bought the mezuzah if it was so kosher. Sometimes people buy mezuzahs from not a reliable soifer, and it turns out that the mezuzah was never kosher. But assuming the mezuzah was kosher once, and it was checked really well, and later it was sealed in a nice, today they use sometimes metal or glass, plastic containers for mezuzah. The cases for mezuzah are sometimes really very well preserving what's inside. So maybe there is no need to check in such a case. And on this I'll end. If you like this video, please press like and please subscribe to our channel.